The chains around his wrists were cold and heavy as Commander Marcus Cole stood before the tribunal of the Veltari Dominion, and every alien eye in the massive chamber stared at him with hatred and disgust. He was innocent, but that did not matter to them at all. The Veltari were tall creatures with silver skin and 4 arms, and they considered themselves the rulers of this part of the galaxy. They had controlled 12 star systems for thousands of years, and they did not like humans very much because humanity was growing too fast and becoming too powerful. Marcus had served as a military commander for Earth's colonial fleet for 30 years, and he had never broken a single law in his entire life. But 3 weeks ago, a diplomatic ship had exploded and killed 32 alien ambassadors, and somehow all the evidence pointed directly at him. He knew the evidence was fake because he had been nowhere near that ship when it exploded. Someone had planted false records and fake video footage to frame him for this terrible crime. And he suspected it was the Veltari themselves who wanted to stop humanity from gaining more influence in galactic politics. Marcus Cole of Earth, the head judge, announced in a voice that echoed through the chamber, "You have been found guilty of mass murder and acts of terrorism against the Galactic Union." "I am innocent," Marcus said calmly, but his words meant nothing here. The judge smiled coldly and raised one of his 4 hands toward a massive screen behind him, and the screen showed an image of a red planet covered in thick jungle and dark clouds. "Your sentence is exile to Kitharus 9, the judge declared, "the planet that every species in the galaxy calls the Maw." A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd because everyone knew about Kitharus 9. It was considered the most dangerous planet in all the known systems, a death world where even the plants were deadly predators. No exile had ever survived more than 3 days on its surface. The Veltari guards dragged Marcus from the chamber and threw him into a small transport ship. And they gave him only 2 things for his journey: a simple survival knife and a translation implant that would let him understand any language he might encounter. "You will die slowly," one of the guards whispered to him with a cruel grin, "and the beasts of the Maw will feast on your soft human flesh." The transport ship flew for 6 hours through the darkness of space before it reached the red planet, and Marcus spent that time thinking about his wife and daughter back on Earth. He wondered if he would ever see them again, but deep in his heart, he knew that the Veltari expected him to die within hours of landing. When the ship reached the planet, the guards did not even bother to land properly. They simply opened the cargo door while flying low over the jungle and pushed Marcus out into the air. He fell through red clouds and crashed through thick branches before hitting the ground hard, enough to knock the breath from his lungs. And for a long moment, he simply lay there in the mud and tried to remember how to breathe. The jungle around him was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The trees were massive with bark the color of dried blood, and strange vines hung from every branch like the tentacles of some enormous creature. The air was thick and hot and smelled like metal and rotting meat. Marcus forced himself to stand up even though his body ached from the fall, and he pulled his knife from his belt and looked around at this alien wilderness that was supposed to be his grave. He heard movement in the shadows almost immediately. Something was watching him from the darkness between the trees, and he could see eyes glowing with a faint orange light. The eyes were large and round and filled with a terrible hunger that made his blood run cold. Then the creature stepped out of the shadows, and Marcus felt true fear for the first time in many years. It was called a Skethra, according to his translation implant, and it was the most terrifying predator he had ever seen. It had 6 powerful legs and a body covered in armor that looked like glass, and its mouth was filled with teeth as long as his fingers. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, and it moved with the smooth grace of a perfect killing machine. The Skethra tilted its head and studied Marcus with those burning orange eyes, and he realized that it was not attacking immediately because it was curious about him. Perhaps it had never seen a human before and wanted to understand what kind of prey had fallen into its territory. Marcus did not wait for the creature to finish its examination. He turned and ran as fast as his legs could carry him, crashing through the undergrowth and leaping over fallen logs, while the sounds of pursuit thundered behind him. The Skethra was faster than him, much faster, but the thick jungle slowed it down just enough for Marcus to stay ahead. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs screamed for rest. And finally he found a narrow crack in a cliff face that was too small for the massive predator to follow. He squeezed himself into that crack and pressed, his back against the cold stone while the Skethra clawed at the entrance with its razor-sharp talons. The creature roared in frustration, and the sound shook the very air around Marcus like thunder. But eventually, after what felt like hours, the Skethra grew tired of waiting and disappeared back into the jungle. Marcus knew it had not given up, though, because he could still feel those orange eyes watching him from somewhere in the darkness. He spent his first night on Kitharus 9 hiding in that crack in the rocks, shivering from cold and fear while strange sounds echoed through the jungle around him. He heard creatures fighting and dying. He heard plants moving and hunting. And he heard the distant roars of predators that made the Skethra sound small by comparison. Most people would have given up hope in that moment, but Marcus Cole was not most people. He had survived 30 years of military service, including missions that should have killed him a dozen times. He had trained his mind and body to overcome any obstacle, and he had something that the Valkyrie did not understand about humans. Humans refused to die. As the red sun rose over the deadly jungle the next morning, Marcus Cole crawled out of his hiding place and looked at the wilderness around him with new eyes. This planet wanted to kill him, and every creature on it wanted to eat him, but he was going to survive. He was going to do more than survive. He was going to make this death world his home, and one day, he was going to make the Valkyrie regret ever sending him here. With his knife in his hand and determination burning in his heart, Commander Marcus Cole began walking deeper into the most dangerous jungle in the galaxy, ready to fight for every single breath. The jungle tried to kill Marcus Cole in 100 different ways during his first week on Kitharus 9, and he learned very quickly that everything on this planet was designed to hunt and destroy. The flowers that looked beautiful were actually traps that would snap shut on any creature that came too close. And the water in the streams was filled with tiny parasites that would eat through flesh in minutes. Even the ground itself was dangerous because massive worms, live, beneath the surface and could swallow a man whole without warning. But Marcus did not die. He watched and he learned and he adapted to this hostile world in ways that would have amazed any scientist who studied human survival instincts. When he discovered that certain plants spit acid, he learned to recognize their shape and color and avoid them completely. When he found that the parasites in the water could not survive heat, he figured out how to boil water using hot rocks from volcanic vents. The Skethra pack continued to follow him wherever he went, and Marcus counted 7 of them stalking his movements day after day. They did not attack him directly anymore because they had learned that he was clever and dangerous, but they watched him constantly with those glowing orange eyes. At first, Marcus thought they were simply waiting for him to make a mistake so they could kill him easily. But as the days passed, he began to notice something strange about their behavior. The Skethra were not just mindless predators as he had first believed. They communicated with each other using low sounds that vibrated through the air like distant thunder, and their armored shells would glow with different colors that seemed to carry meaning. They had a social structure with leaders and followers, and they made decisions together as a group. Marcus started paying close attention to everything the Skethra did, and he recorded his observations by scratching notes on flat rocks with the tip of his knife. He learned that the blue glow on their shells meant they were calm, while the red glow meant they were angry or threatened. He learned that the largest Skethra with the most scars was the leader of the pack, and all the others would lower their heads in respect whenever he walked past. This was not just a pack of animals hunting for food. This was an intelligent species with culture and communication and hierarchy. Marcus used this knowledge to his advantage in many clever ways. When he needed to cross their territory, he would make himself appear small and non-threatening by crouching low and moving slowly. When he found food, he would leave a portion of it behind as an offering to show that he understood the concept of sharing territory. The Skethra seemed fascinated by his behavior because no prey had ever acted this way before. By the end of his second week, Marcus had built himself a proper shelter in the hollow trunk of a massive dead tree. He had woven a simple armor from the shed exoskeletons of smaller creatures, and he had crafted spears and axes from the black obsidian rocks that were common in this area. He was no longer a helpless victim waiting to die. On the 15th day, Marcus made fire for the first time. He had found deposits of a mineral that created sparks when struck against obsidian, and he had gathered dry moss and dead wood to use as fuel. When the flames finally caught and rose into the air, the effect on the jungle around him was immediate and dramatic. Every creature within sight fled in terror from the dancing orange light. The Skethra pack retreated into the shadows and made sounds of distress that Marcus had never heard from them before. The fire triggered some ancient fear buried deep in their instincts, a memory from a time long ago when flames had threatened their ancestors. Marcus understood immediately that fire was his greatest weapon on this world. He kept fires burning around his shelter every night, and the predators that had once circled his position no longer dared to come close. He started carrying torches when he traveled through the jungle, and even the massive Skethra would move aside to let him pass. But Marcus did not want to simply survive by hiding behind walls of flame forever. He wanted to understand this world and find his place within it, so he began to hunt. His first successful hunt was a small creature that looked like a rabbit with scales, and he cooked it over his fire and ate the first real meal he had enjoyed since arriving on this death world. The taste was strange, but the meat was good, and it gave him strength to continue fighting. His second hunt was larger and more dangerous. A predator with 4 legs and a mouth full of venomous fangs that had been stalking him for days. Marcus set a trap using vines and sharp stakes, and when the creature fell into his pit and impaled itself on the wooden spears, he felt a surge of pride and power that he had not experienced in a very long time. The Skethra watched this hunt with obvious interest, and Marcus could see their shells glowing with colors he had not seen before. His translation implant struggled to interpret their communications, but he caught fragments that suggested words like strange and dangerous and new. They were no longer looking at him as prey. By the 30th day, Marcus Cole had transformed from a helpless exile into a true hunter of Kitharus 9. His body was lean and hard from constant exercise, and his senses had sharpened to detect danger before it could reach him. Scars covered his arms and legs from dozens of close encounters, but each scar was a lesson learned and a battle survived. He had killed 3 of the Skethra pack members in self-defense using traps and fire and clever tactics, and though this made the others more cautious around him, it also seemed to increase their respect. In their culture, the ability to kill was the measure of worth, and this human had proven himself more deadly than any prey they had ever encountered. The leader of the pack, the massive scarred alpha with orange eyes that burned like twin suns, had begun watching Marcus with an intensity that felt almost personal. There was something like recognition in that ancient gaze, as if the creature was seeing Marcus not as food, but as something else entirely. Something equal. Marcus did not know what would happen next, but he knew that his relationship with the Skethra was changing in ways that might determine whether he lived or died. The time for simply surviving was coming to an end. The time for something greater was about to begin. Marcus Cole crouched on a high branch and watched the Skethra pack gather in the clearing below, and he knew that today would change everything. 45 days had passed as his exile began, and in that time he had learned more about the Skethra than any outsider in history. He understood their language of sounds and colors, their hunting patterns, their social rules, and most importantly, their concept of respect. The Skethra did not respect weakness or mercy. They respected strength and courage, and the willingness to face death without fear. In their culture, a creature earned its place through action, and no amount of hiding or running would ever make them see him as anything more than clever prey. Marcus was tired of being prey. The leader of the pack was called Vornkith, according to the translation implant, which meant he who walks in shadow in their ancient tongue. He was the largest and most powerful Skethra that Marcus had ever seen, standing nearly 12 feet tall with armor scarred from countless battles. His orange eyes glowed brighter than any of the others, and when he roared, the entire jungle seemed to tremble. Vornkith had ruled this territory for 20 cycles, and in all that time, nothing had ever challenged his authority. He had killed creatures twice his size and survived wounds that would have destroyed any lesser being. He was legend among his kind, a perfect predator who feared nothing in this galaxy. But today, a human was going to challenge him. Marcus climbed down from his tree and walked toward the clearing with his spear in one hand and a torch in the other. His heart was pounding so hard that he could hear it in his ears, but his face remained calm and his steps remained steady. He could not show fear because the Skethra would sense it immediately. The pack noticed him approaching, and their shells began glowing with agitated colors of red and orange. They spread out to surround him, cutting off any path of escape, and their growls filled the air with the promise of violence. Marcus ignored them all and walked directly toward Vornkith. The Alpha was resting in the center of the clearing on a pile of bones from his previous kills, and his massive head rose slowly as the human approached. Those burning orange eyes studied Marcus with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone to examine his very soul. Any sane creature would have run away or begged for mercy, but Marcus did neither. He stopped 10 feet in front of the Alpha and drove his spear into the ground with all his strength. The wooden shaft stood straight up from the earth like a flag planted in conquered territory, and the meaning of this gesture was clear in every culture. This was a declaration. The translation implant buzzed with the Skethra words for what he had just done. Challenge of equals, or claim of worth, or something similar. He was telling the Alpha that he refused to be treated as prey anymore, that he demanded to be recognized as something more. Vornkith rose slowly to his full terrifying height, and his shadow fell over Marcus like the darkness of a grave. The Alpha's shell pulsed with deep crimson light that spoke of ancient rage, and his claws extended from his feet to dig furrows in the hard ground. The other Skethra went completely silent because they had never seen anything like this before. For a long moment, predator and human simply stared at each other, and Marcus forced himself to meet those orange eyes without looking away. He knew that showing weakness now would mean instant death, so he stood his ground even though every instinct screamed at him to run. Then something unexpected happened. Vornkith tilted his massive head to one side and made a sound that the implant translated as curiosity or interest, or perhaps amusement. The crimson glow on his shell slowly faded to a calmer orange, and he lowered himself back down to the ground. He did not attack. Instead, the Alpha began to circle Marcus slowly, examining him from every angle like a scientist studying a strange new specimen. He sniffed the air around the human and touched his armored snout to the spear that Marcus had planted in the earth. "You are small," Vornkith rumbled in a voice like grinding stones. And the implant translated his words clearly for the first time. "You are soft and slow and weak compared to the hunters of this world. Yet you have survived longer than any other creature the sky has dropped into our territory." Marcus remained perfectly still and said nothing. "You have killed 3 of my pack," the Alpha continued, "using fire and tricks and patience that we do not understand. You watch us and learn our ways and use that knowledge against us. You are the strangest prey we have ever known." "I am not prey," Marcus said firmly, and his voice did not shake even slightly. Vornkith made a sound that might have been laughter, and his eyes seemed to glow even brighter with something that looked almost like approval. "Perhaps you speak truth," the Alpha said, "but words are empty air. In this world, only actions carry meaning. If you wish to be seen as equal, you must prove your worth through trial." Marcus nodded because he had expected this challenge. "What must I do?" he asked. Vornkith turned his massive body toward the east, where the jungle grew darker and the mountains rose against the red sky, and he pointed with one clawed limb at the distant peaks shrouded in smoke and ash. "The Deadlands," the Alpha said, "the burning heart of this world where even my kind fears to walk. No Skethra has entered those lands and returned for many generations. If you can survive the Deadlands and come back to this place, then you will have proven yourself worthy of respect." The other Skethra made sounds of surprise and concern because this challenge seemed impossible. But Marcus looked toward those distant mountains and felt no fear. He had faced death every single day since arriving on this planet, and he was still standing. Whatever horrors waited in the Deadlands, he would face them the same way he had faced everything else. "I accept," Marcus said. Vornkith lowered his head in a gesture that the implant recognized as formal acknowledgement, and his shell glowed with a color that Marcus had never seen before, a deep purple that seemed to pulse with ancient meaning. "Then go, strange creature," the Alpha said, "and if you return, you will be Kethver, one who belongs to the hunt. But if you die in those burning lands, your bones will join the countless others who have tried and failed." Marcus pulled his spear from the ground and turned toward the eastern mountains without another word. Behind him, 7 Skethra watched in silence as the small human walked toward the most dangerous place on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. His trial had begun. The Deadlands were worse than anything Marcus Cole had imagined, and he understood within the first hour why even the mighty Skethra feared this place. The ground beneath his feet was hot enough to burn through his makeshift boots, and rivers of glowing orange liquid flowed between the black rocks like the blood of some dying god. The air was thick with ash and smoke that made every breath feel like swallowing fire, and strange lights flickered in the distance like the eyes of creatures that had never known the coolness of the jungle. Marcus wrapped cloth around his face to filter the worst of the ash and pressed forward into this burning wasteland because turning back was not an option. He had made a challenge and accepted a trial, and failure meant death just as surely as the dangers ahead. The first creature he encountered in the Deadlands attacked without warning on his 3rd day. It burst from beneath the hot ground in an explosion of rock and flame. A serpent made entirely of crystal that reflected the red light like a living prism. Its body was 30 feet long and covered in razor-sharp edges that could slice through flesh as easily as a blade through water. Marcus dove to the side as the crystalline devourer struck it where he had been standing, and he rolled across the scorching ground until he found shelter behind a boulder. The serpent coiled around and came at him again with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. He could not outrun this creature, and his spear would shatter against its crystal hide. But Marcus was a survivor, and survivors use their environment as a weapon. He ran toward one of the thermal vents he had spotted earlier, a crack in the earth where superheated gas erupted in regular intervals. The ground shook beneath his feet as he sprinted across the burning landscape with the crystal serpent close behind. Just as he reached the vent, Marcus threw himself to the side and the serpent lunged directly over the crack in the earth. At that exact moment, the vent erupted with a massive blast of steam and fire that struck the creature's crystalline body with devastating force. The serpent screamed as the extreme heat caused its crystal structure to crack and shatter, and within seconds, the magnificent predator had exploded into 1,000 glittering fragments that rained down across the Deadlands like deadly snow. Marcus lay on the hot ground and gasped for breath while pieces of crystal cut shallow wounds across his exposed skin. But he was alive. The first test of the Deadlands had been passed. The trials continued day after day, each one more terrible than the last. On the 5th day, Marcus discovered a lake of liquid that looked like mercury, shimmering silver under the red sky and stretching for miles in every direction. There was no way around it, and he could not swim through it without being dissolved by whatever strange chemistry gave the liquid its metallic shine. He spent 2 days building a raft from the corpse of a massive creature he found dead on the shore, using its bones as a frame and its thick hide as a covering. When he finally pushed off from the bank and began to float across the silver lake, he held his breath and prayed to whatever gods might listen in this forsaken place. Strange shapes moved beneath the surface of the mercury lake, and sometimes they would bump against the bottom of his raft with enough force to nearly tip him over. Marcus gripped the edges of his makeshift vessel and kept his balance through pure determination until finally, after 12 hours of terror, he reached the far shore. On the 10th day, he met the greatest challenge of all. It rose from behind a mountain of black stone like a nightmare given physical form. A creature so massive that it blocked out the red sun and cast a shadow over the entire valley. Its body was covered in plates of natural armor thicker than castle walls, and its roar shook the ground hard enough to crack rocks and split the earth. Marcus had no name for this monster because nothing like it existed in any database his implant could access. It was ancient beyond measure, perhaps the oldest living thing on this entire planet, and it had ruled the Deadlands since before the Skethra even existed. There was no way to fight such a creature directly. Even an army with advanced weapons would struggle against something so enormous. But Marcus had spent weeks watching this landscape and learning its weaknesses. And he had noticed something important about the canyon where the monster made its home. The walls were unstable, cracked by centuries of volcanic activity, and ready to collapse with the right amount of force. He spent 3 days preparing his trap while staying hidden from the giant creature's notice. He found deposits of the explosive minerals that were common in volcanic regions and placed them carefully along the weakest points of the canyon walls. He created fuses from plant fibers soaked in flammable oil and connected everything together in a careful pattern. On the 4th day, Marcus revealed himself to the monster and ran. The creature roared and charged after him with steps that made the entire canyon tremble, and Marcus led it directly into his trap. He had calculated the timing perfectly, and just as the monster reached the center of the canyon, he touched his torch to the first fuse. The explosion was magnificent. Fire and rock erupted from both sides of the canyon as the walls collapsed inward with a thunder that could be heard for miles. Thousands of tons of stone crashed down onto the massive creature, burying it beneath a mountain of debris that would take centuries to erode away. The roar of the dying monster echoed through the Deadlands one final time before silence fell. Marcus climbed the pile of rubble and found what he was looking for. One of the creature's enormous fangs, broken free during the collapse and lying among the stones like a trophy waiting to be claimed. The fang was longer than his arm and sharper than any blade he had ever seen. He lifted it onto his shoulders and began the long journey back. The return trip took 20 more days, and Marcus faced a dozen more dangers along the way. He was burned by volcanic gases and cut by razor-sharp rocks, and nearly killed by predators that sensed his weakness. By the time he finally walked out of the Deadlands and back into the jungle, he was barely recognizable as the man who had entered. 2 fingers on his left hand were missing, lost to infection after a creature had bitten him. Scars covered every inch of his body like a map of suffering. His eyes had changed somehow, becoming harder and colder, the eyes of someone who had stared into the worst hell imaginable and refused to look away. But he was alive, and he carried the fang of a monster that no Skethra had ever defeated. Vornkith was waiting at the border of the territory, and the Alpha's orange eyes widened when he saw what Marcus carried on his shoulders. The other Skethra made sounds of amazement and disbelief, because they recognized that fang from the ancient stories told by their ancestors. Marcus walked directly to the Alpha and dropped the massive fang at his feet without saying a word. Vornkith was silent for a long moment, and then he lowered his massive head until his armored snout touched Marcus's forehead in a gesture of profound respect. His shell glowed with that deep purple color again, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with something that sounded almost like awe. "You are Kethver," the Alpha declared, "one who belongs to the hunt. From this day forward, you are not prey. You are pack." The other Skethra raised their heads and roared in acknowledgement, and Marcus Cole stood among the deadliest predators in the galaxy as one of their own. He had earned something that no human had ever earned before: the respect of monsters. 120 days had passed since Marcus Cole fell from the sky, and the man who now stood in the Crimson Jungle was nothing like the prisoner the Valkyrie had condemned to death. His body was covered in armor made from Skethra skeletons, black as midnight and stronger than steel. His face was marked with scars that told the story of 100 battles survived. His eyes held a fire that burned brighter than any torch, the fire of someone who had conquered the unconquerable. But more impressive than his appearance was what surrounded him. The Skethra pack had grown under his influence from 7 hunters to nearly 40. As word spread through the jungle about the strange creature from the sky who had survived the Deadlands. Other packs had come to see this miracle for themselves, and many had chosen to follow Vornkith and his unlikely brother. Marcus had taught them things they had never known before. He taught them how to use fire, not just as a weapon, but as a tool for cooking meat and clearing paths through the densest vegetation. He taught them strategy and coordination, how to work together in ways that multiplied their already terrifying strength. He taught them the concept of mercy for creatures that could be useful, creating a network of smaller animals that served as scouts and messengers. In return, the Skethra taught Marcus how to move through the jungle like a shadow, silent and invisible even to the sharpest senses. They taught him to read the vibrations of the earth and the chemical signals in the air. They taught him to become part of this world, instead of fighting against it every moment. Vornkith had become more than just an alpha who tolerated the human presence. He had become something like a brother, a fellow hunter who understood the value of strength combined with wisdom. The two of them would often sit together in the evening and share their thoughts through a strange combination of words and colors and gestures. Life on Kitharus 9 was still dangerous, but Marcus had found something unexpected in this death world: a home and a family and a purpose. Then the Valkyrie came. The survey drone appeared first, a small flying machine sent to confirm that the exile had died as expected. When its cameras transmitted images of a human standing at the head of a Skethra hunting pack, the Dominion reacted with shock and fury. This was impossible. No one survived Kitharus 9. No one. The Valkyrie could not allow this human to live because his survival made them look weak. If word spread that their most terrible punishment had failed to kill a single member of an inferior species, their authority would be questioned throughout the galaxy. They sent a military retrieval team, 40 soldiers armed with plasma rifles and energy shields, wearing powered armor that could withstand almost any attack. Their orders were simple: kill the human and destroy any evidence that he had ever survived. The soldiers landed their dropship in a clearing near the edge of Skethra territory, and they marched into the jungle with the confidence of conquerors. They expected to find a single weak man hiding in the trees, easy prey for their superior technology. They were wrong. Marcus had been watching the skies ever since the drone appeared, and he knew that the Velthari would never accept his survival. He had prepared for this moment, and when the soldiers entered his territory, they walked directly into a trap that would become legend. The first attack came from below, as Skethra burst from hidden tunnels beneath the jungle floor and dragged screaming soldiers into the darkness. The aliens fired their weapons wildly, but the predators moved too fast, appearing and disappearing like ghosts made of living shadow. The second attack came from above, as Marcus himself dropped from the canopy onto the commander of the retrieval team. His obsidian blade found the weak point in the alien's armor, and the commander fell before he could even raise his weapon. "I am Marcus Cole," he shouted so all the soldiers could hear, "and you are not welcome in my home." The battle lasted 3 hours, and it was the most one-sided fight the Velthari had ever experienced. Their plasma rifles were useless against enemies they could not see. Their energy shields failed against claws that could tear through starship hulls. Their powered armor became coffins as the Skethra learned to target the joints and seams where the protection was weakest. Marcus rode on Vornkith's back like a general commanding his army, directing the hunters with signals they had practiced together for weeks. He knew every tactic the Velthari might try, and he countered each one with the combined might of human intelligence and Skethra savagery. When the battle finally ended, 23 soldiers remained alive, huddled together in a circle of failing shields, while 40 Skethra surrounded them with hunger in their glowing eyes. Marcus approached the survivors and looked down at them with no pity in his heart. These were the servants of the people who had framed him, who had sent him to die, who had stolen him from his family and his life. "Go back to your masters," he commanded, "and tell them what you have seen here. Tell them that Kitharis 9 is no longer a prison, but a sovereign territory under my protection. Tell them that humanity does not forget betrayal, and one day there will be a reckoning for what was done to me." The survivors fled to their damaged dropship and escaped into the sky, and Marcus knew that his message would spread across the galaxy like wildfire. 1 year later, investigators from the Galactic Union finally proved that Marcus Cole had been framed. The evidence against him was exposed as fabrication, created by Velthari politicians who wanted to stop humanity's growing influence. His conviction was overturned, and he was offered a full pardon with restoration of his military rank. A diplomatic ship came to Kitharis 9 carrying the official documents and an invitation to return to civilized space as a hero. Marcus read the pardon carefully and then handed it back to the ambassador with a smile. "Thank you," he said, "but I will not be returning." The ambassador stared at him in confusion because no sane person would choose to stay on a death world when they could live in comfort among their own kind. "This is my home now," Marcus explained, "and these are my people. I was sent here to die, but instead I found something that I never knew I was missing, a place where I truly belong." He turned and walked back into the crimson jungle where Vornkith and the pack were waiting, and the ambassador watched in amazement as the deadliest predators in the galaxy gathered around the human-like family, greeting a beloved member. In the years that followed, Kitharis 9 became something it had never been before, a sanctuary. Humans and aliens who had been wrongly convicted and sentenced to death were given the choice to come to Marcus Cole's territory, where they could prove themselves and earn a place among the hunters. Some died in the attempt because the planet was still deadly, but many survived and found the same redemption that Marcus had found. The Velthari Dominion collapsed 15 years later, brought down by the scandal of their corruption and the growing power of humanity among the stars. But Marcus Cole did not celebrate their fall because he had moved beyond revenge long ago. He had become something greater than a commander or a survivor or even a legend. He had become a bridge between two worlds, proof that understanding and respect could exist between species that had nothing in common except the will to survive. And when alien traders would visit the edge of his territory to trade goods and share news from the galaxy, they would sometimes catch a glimpse of him, a scarred human riding on the back of a massive Skethra, leading a pack of the most terrifying predators anyone had ever seen. They would ask who he was, and the traders who knew the story would answer with respect in their voices. "That is Marcus Cole," they would say, "the human who was exiled to the deadliest wilderness in the galaxy and became something the predators respected." And somewhere in the Crimson Jungle, surrounded by creatures that had once hunted him and now called him brother, Marcus Cole would smile and know that he had finally found his place in the universe.